No more awkward dancing to interact with the episode. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Deductionist podcast. What a week it's been. What a time to be alive. I've had a rather interesting occurrence with some hate comments this week. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen them. My wife is, I'm not the only one on the internet, so I'm not the only one that gets hate comments, right? Everyone at certain stages, right? So my wife says to me, why bother with them? You usually leave them alone. But my nurture and my nature to a certain degree is aggressive confrontation. There's quite a lot of these things that I just let fizzle by, but these two this week were so just infinitely stupid. Infinitely stupid. So let me tell you about one of them. There was a comment on the episode with myself and Bob on Timothy Leary's interpersonal circumplex, right? And the comment was unwatchable. Now, have any opinion that you want on anything that I do. That's your opinion is not for me to decide. That's entirely up to you. But I was thinking about the choice of the delivery, right? Someone's commenting unwatchable. So when you think about it, that's empirically impossible, right? Because either he watched it, so it's not unwatchable, he just didn't enjoy it, or he didn't watch it, so his data's invalid. And I ran the comment through the circumplex as well. I thought it was only fair, but really, if you want to make a dent, you're gonna have to up your game. So yeah, I've been having a bit of fun playing with the people who believe these kind of comments are the way forward. Now, before we get into the reason why you clicked into this, let me tell you about something that myself and Steve at MX Publishing have cooked up for you to show our festive cheer, to reward you guys for listening to this podcast and being Sherlock Holmes fans in general. For anybody that has listened to this, because it's the only way to pick up this code, you can go to any of the sales items on MX Publishing. And when this goes out live, I'll leave when this goes out tomorrow. This is the live version. When it goes out edited and prettified tomorrow, I'll leave all of the details underneath so you can click the links from there. But if you know how to find mxpublishing.com and you go to the sales items, put in everything that you want in your cart and then put BC in as a code, you, my friends, will get yourself a 10% discount on everything off your entire order, right? Awesome that. So now is the perfect time to take advantage and get yourself some new Sherlock Holmes works. I'm going to be reviewing a lot of these kinds of things in the future. Some updated reviews on stuff that we've already gone over and some new stuff as well. Never let it be said that puzzle books are fantastic, right? Because they are puzzles and puzzles and puzzles and puzzles and puzzles. But if you get involved in a story, a narrative, a piece of fiction, a piece of mystery fiction, there is more context for you to understand and play along with as the lead detective, should that be something that you're vested in, or if you're just a mystery fan, then why not dabble in the experience with the guy that arguably started it all in the first place, right? Okay, now, aujourd'hui, on part en France pour rencontrer une nouvelle détective, pas comme les autres, Mademoiselle Holmes. Une descendante de ce Sherlock Holmes, mais avec du style français. Beaucoup d'énergie et un petit côté maladroit que j'adore déjà. Alors, installez-vous, prenez un café et préparez-vous à découvrir comment une jeune policière un peu timide devient, presque par accident, une vraie génie de la déduction. Now that I've alienated all of them, and for anyone that does speak French, feel free to correct me because um, I'm just making that up as I go along. So there was probably a lot of mistakes. My dear friends Julie and Pascal are constantly picking me up on my verb conjugations and the like. So any help is greatly appreciated. Now, there is something to be said of why France claiming Holmes kind of matters. There's this core idea that Mademoiselle Holmes is not just another quirky detective show. I mean, it is a quirky detective show, but it's a fun detective show. But it might be France inviting Sherlock into its own crime fiction tradition, right? The series itself centers on Charlie Holmes, a shy police officer and great great granddaughter of Sherlock Holmes, who discovers a kind of latent flair for deduction after a life-changing accident. It launched on TF1 in April 2024 and is billed as being explicitly inspired by Conan Doyle. Now, historically, there's there's already a kind of Franco Holmes connection. In 1912, Doyle sold film rights to the French company Eclair, which produced a series of silent Sherlock Holmes films with, I think his name was Georges Treville. I think I would need fact checking on that one, but more on the literary side, Sherlock has now been um, canonized in France via his inclusion in Gallimard's collection, effectively, welcoming Holmes into this high literature pantheon. There is also the scientific connection around Edmund Locard. Locard's principle of exchange is still used in forensic science today, and he was known back in the day as the French Sherlock Holmes, pioneering many methods that were inspired by the Sherlock Holmes stories and the Sherlock Holmes angle. But back to the TV show, you can frame it as the latest chapter in a long Franco-British tug of war over policing and detection. In the 19th century, British commentators were anxious about whether to imitate or resist the French policing styles. Holmes himself is often written as suspicious of continental methods. I think he was quoted as saying, I confess that I've been blind as a mole, but it is better to learn wisdom late than never to learn it at all." Right? So France might now be saying, what if Holmes learns our way of doing things? And Mademoiselle Holmes becomes that kind of experiment, which is a wonderful analogy. And again, cards on the table. It might be nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. Absolutely, completely disconnected. That's just the thought that I had about it. You know, that here are a few factors. When you look at the realms of behavioral intelligence compared with, this that's just her quirk kind of way of interacting with the world. This core idea is that Charlie's brilliance is treated as a trainable cognitive style or acute personality quirk, right? Traditional adaptations often lean on he's just like that. Like he just has this kind of magical intuition about certain things. You can contrast that with the scenes where Charlie actually engages in observable steps. You know, she's scanning environments, she's tracking inconsistencies, or she's using small behavioral tells from witnesses. It's it's a perfect moment to talk about expert pattern recognition. In real life, experts, um, not just in investigations, chess players, radiologists, threat assessors. There is this breakdown of rapid, experience-built pattern libraries rather than this mystical intuition. You know, their scans look fast, but they're grounded in this kind of vast prior learning. Neuroscientifically, this this insight style problem solving, this kind of aha moments, has been linked to specific neural signatures like bursts of high frequency activity in the right anterior superior temporal gyrus just before the solution appears, right? Data, data, data. I cannot make bricks without clay. So you can ask, does the show actually give Charlie any clay on screen, or does it skip straight to the bricks? A fairly cheesy and labored metaphor, right? But when she's shown as gathering data, you can praise it as closer to genuine behavioral intelligence than the usual, TV genius edit. Charlie is essentially playing out a kind of cognitive transformation almost from this, almost socially anxious, desk bound officer to someone operating in a Holmesian state of heightened observation. Hence the constant hair twitching and all of this kind of thing that goes on. Think of it as attention and salience, right? Early on, Charlie seems um, filtered, cautious, risk avoidant. Post accident, she starts noticing what others miss, micro changes in an environment, small inconsistencies in people's stories, um, physical traces at crime scenes. It tracks with research that shows how attentional scope and salient mapping change when people enter a task focused exploratory mode. Then, I mean, springboarding off in that, right? Look at insight versus analysis. And this is almost directly related to why we are omniscient insights. Insight research shows that people who solve problems with flashes of insight, they show different resting state brain patterns than those who solve analytically. Charlie's um, switch. I was trying to think of a more grandiose word. Charlie's switch after the bike accident can be discussed as a dramatic metaphor for that shift. But her brain moves from plodding step by step, complaint desk work, all of the humdrum of the daily activity, to a more insight heavy global pattern recognition mode. There are meds involved as well, but you can watch that for yourself. That's a trigger point as part of the story. The meds angle is ongoing. And then you can also look at emotion and cognition. Holmes, and I've said it a lot, emotional qualities are antagonistic to clear reasoning, but Charlie's emotional journey is the engine of her cognition. trauma, family legacy, the need for meaning, they all push her into a fuller engagement with the world, right? So again, exploring that in contrast as a way that's it's kind of connected almost um, to the circumplex. You can contrast it with cognitive science, right? Where emotion is understood as uh, integral to decision making rather than its enemy, right? That's why I kind of developed the line as an add-on to make it make sense to those that I teach. The emotional qualities might be antagonistic to clear reasoning, but the qualities of emotion aren't. If you look at you see but you did not observe, the distinction is clear, right? You can use that as a refrain when describing the moment Charlie starts observing friends instead of just living in it, right? And they have a really fun Watson character. He's the Sammy. He's the social regulator. He's the ethical anchor. He's the Gus. He's the Wilson. He's great. Um, I mean, he does have a tendency to be portrayed as comic relief. But when you watch more and more, that's the comic relief is only there because it's contrasted against Charlie's actions, right? He's Charlie's Watson equivalent, but he's a behavioural counterweight, which that's that's one of the many functions of a good Watson. It was the same with Martin Freeman as well. If you look at the Doyle's original, Watson is the um, barometer for emotion, like a narrative. He's us. Sammy is very often playing that role, translating Charlie's leaps into understandable language, pulling her back from social misreads, and sometimes representing us, the viewer, representing our skepticism from a psychological angle. It's a great place to talk about the theory of mind, and social buffering. These are individuals who lean heavily into analytical or hyper observant modes, often reliant upon a partner to manage social nuance, emotional fallout, and ethical implications. Sammy is a little like Charlie's metacognitive mirror. The person who forces her to explain how she knows what she knows, which is exactly what Watson did as well. And that's exactly what I do my best to do in sessions from there, rather than just what feels right. You have to be able to back it up. So we have a French Sherlock. Are there any um, cultural filters on the deduction that's seen? The show does something for my two pennies, really quite clever in terms of it keeps the Holmes DNA, but it runs it through French cultural norms and anxieties. You know, it references contemporary life in France, influences, social media, class tensions, urban versus provincial areas of France. It's the discussion of culture as a filter for observation. Would this exact same scenario play out the same way in England or in America or in South America, Africa, China, wherever? London isn't the same as Paris or Lyon or some other French suburb, right? It's historically speaking, France built its own Holmes style mythos with Arsène Lupin. This the Netflix show, but this gentleman thief and a master of disguise. It was Maurice Leblanc in à 1905. 1905, often described as the French counterpart to Holmes. When the show first came out on Netflix with Omar Sy, it was billed as the French version of BBC Sherlock, with the text and the action and the long coat, the blowing in the wind, and grandiose sensibilities. Right? LeBlanc even wrote crossovers where Lupin faces a thinly disguised Holmes. It was I think it was Sherlock Holmes or something like that. Again, fact check me. I don't know that for sure. These are the same as ever. I'm just talking to you, right? But this is a reminder that the French culture has long negotiated its own identity by playing with Doyle's character. So is an interesting thought. And cards on the table. I've not finished Mademoiselle Holmes yet. I'm nearly there, but I'm not finished with it. There's two seasons. So you can ask, is Charlie Holmes, more Lupin, more Charlie? Is she a mix? Does she stand for order and deduction, or for a playful subversion of rules where needed? You know, and there is that thing with television that is it just like TV convenience? Or is there a logical coherence to it? Ah, yeah, it was Sherlock Holmes. Actually, that name was then used in a video game due to copyright issues. Okay, cool. Didn't know that. Not a gamer, so I would need the update. But in terms of the cases, but on TV being fun mysteries to follow, and fun practice, if nothing else, you can put your investigator hat on and critique the quality of the mysteries. If it was followed as procedurally correct as in real life, that it would be entirely, you know, whatever the opposite of sex appeal is. But when we think about it, is there an evidence trail for us as the viewer to follow? Are we shown sufficient clues before the solution? Are key facts held back and dropped in only at the reveal for the sake of the drama, for the sake of the story? Because it's not an allegory for practice. It's a TV show. You know, what's the behavioral plausibility of the actions? Do suspects behave in ways that match real world stress, or deception indicators, or risk? Are they shaped around plot twists or plot convenience? Right. That's really where you look at the change of the situations for the sense of cognitive realism. Right? Does Charlie actually reason on screen, or does the camera cut from confused face to perfect solution with no immediate steps? And in the episodes I've watched thus far, there are a couple of things that are held back for the sake of the arching narrative and the drama and the things that are designed to keep you coming back episode to episode. But for the sake of the story, we can't forget that it is TV, right? So it is a heightened reflection of real life. But there are these little elements to follow, these little things. And there's a great example of that in I think it was episode 2, maybe 3. Um, with an influencer going missing, and there was this thing around almonds and vegan milk and exercise, and the logic around nail polish. It was wonderfully broken down in order to provide insights if you were actually thinking about it. In those moments when Charlie does come out with a confused face or thinking, or Sammy notices something that she's doing, it is it's like you feel like you're going along for it with her. If you follow along each of these things, even aha moments are prepared by prior data encoding and incubation. The brain doesn't conjure solutions ex nihilo. you know It is the when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. The show, again, only my opinion. The show honors that, right? It honors that in the rolling out of methods. She's not right at every turn. There's sometimes where she is wrong and it changes, or there's sometimes when she's being shown as wrong and her following the logic, insisting that it must be this way, and it's eventually, it's a wonderful example of that Holmesian quote, and it's consistent across the episodes that I've seen. And there's something interesting, at least for me, obviously, because I'm a massive dork, and I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you are too. But there's this psychology of legacy almost in that Charlie Holmes is Sherlock Holmes's daughter. Sherlock Holmes is real in the world of this TV show. He's real to me as well, right? Charlie isn't just a detective. She's living with mythology in the family tree. It's like how do you deal with that kind of pressure growing up in shadow of somebody that most people around the world consider to be legendary, parents or grandparents. It's the wrestling with imposter syndrome and role avoidance, or being afraid of her abilities in certain situations. There are connections in this towards narrative psychology, in that we organize our lives into stories. Charlie's arc is essentially, I refuse the story, then the story refused to leave me alone, right? So like this, I mean, this is what inspired me to not the show, sorry, this idea inspired me to look into ancestry, because all of the relatives that I've known, it goes back as far as my granddad. In what I mean, it's never been involved in policing, but every single person that I've known has either a curiosity about people or actively uses observation as a focus in their role and the way that they think about processing and interacting as a result. So this has me curious about how far it goes, but it might not go anywhere. But it's this kind of angle that you can really start to apply some rationale and reasoning to your own lives as a result. Are you just an investigator, or are you something else, and you've arranged your life in such a way that it communicates the story about being a podcaster? That type of thing. There is neuroscience of trauma and change in that. This is back to the TV show now. That wasn't that obvious. In that this sudden accident is a trigger for reevaluation, and it fits quite nicely with what we know about how salient events can shift attentional habits and self-concept. Even if the show obviously exaggerates the speed and the scale, it would have to. It's a TV show after all. But this is the case. My name is Sherlock Holmes. It is my business to know what other people don't know. Um, Hello, Mr. Architect. Um, yeah. Um, so like the fun question to contemplate on the back of that might be, what happens when that line becomes a family expectation rather than a personal boast? How does it shape her choices and her actions around her own mental health? You know, it's it's got a great balance of accuracy around the use of specific policing tactics. The tech and OSINT, which is the open source intelligence stuff. you know, Phone records, financial trails, CCTV, social media, anything that is open source media analysis. There are great uses of that throughout. Mademoiselle Holmes sometimes plays the game for its own sake, as does Sherlock, which is fine for television, so long as you guys remember that real world investigations are games where lives and justice and stakes are much higher. I love your memory videos. Thank you. Thank you for watching them. I hope they have served you well. All that is to say that Charlie Holmes is a great show. I'm really enjoying it, and it plays heavy with the reason that I chose to do this as a whole episode is as it connected to the previous stuff that I've mentioned about it not being Sherlock Holmes. I mean, it continues, but it keeps the focus around the central pull, and there's characters that are archetypally true, and their roles are carried out in a similar way that evolves a story, and not just creating these kinds of things for anecdotal sense. You know, Holmes travelled from Victorian London to French silent cinema, to Hollywood, to BBC, to prestige drama, to Japanese anime, and now to TF1. You know, France went from creating its own rival in Lupin to celebrating Holmes, you know, through Charlie and on mainstream television. It's the shift from seeing Holmes as this clever puzzle solver to recognizing him as a tool for thinking about how humans notice, how they reason, and how they behave. That's the space that I live in professionally. Holmes began as a British answer to urban crime, then became a global template for the thinking investigator. Mademoiselle Holmes, to me, is France's way of saying we accept the template, but we're going to print it on our own paper. Right? As cultural observers, seeing how France absorbs and reshapes an English legend, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see. Let me try it again. Bear with me. Voilà. C'était notre petit voyage dans l'univers de Mademoiselle Holmes. Si cette détective française vous a donné envie de regarder plus attentivement autour de vous, mission accomplie. Merci d'avoir écouté. Prenez soin de vous et surtout restez curieux. À la prochaine enquête.